Welcome to MMA Fancast. My name is Luke Payson, and I'm excited to have a returning guest of the show, Chance Grillot. Chance, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me again.
I am honored to have you back on the show, and it's exciting because you have a title fight coming up. So let's jump right in. It's only 2 weeks away, May 13th, at Brawl on the Bridge, which is a great name for New Line Cagefighting, the promotion. Great event name, Brawl on the Bridge, because it's in Bridgeport, West Virginia. But you're going to be fighting for the featherweight amateur belt. You're a very experienced amateur going up against, I guess you're both challengers, but it's an open belt. So let's talk about that. How did this come together? How are you feeling? And I know it must be exciting getting in for a belt.
Yeah, I mean, how it came together is, I was just really looking for a fight, and happened the promoter for New Line had one lined up, and the belt's vacant, and, that's pretty simple. That's all it is, I mean, cool, I'm fighting for a belt, but honestly, I just wanted the fight. So belt or no belt, I'm happy to get back in there.
Sure. And I think that's what's cool about you. And I don't think it's bad for the fighters out there that the belt makes it seem like a big deal. That's cool too, because sometimes you need that extra motivation. For you, you're a competitor. You've had 6 amateur fights, which for a lot of people that's an experienced amateur fighter. I've gotten to watch you fight 3 times for 247 at various Brawl in the Bergs for 247 Fighting Championship. So I've gotten to be right cage side. And what's interesting is you put yourself against very tough opponents. This guy's undefeated. You're an experienced guy. Kind of what do you want out of yourself come May 13th?
Just, obviously to win, but, perform well and win well. I just want to fight and have a good fight and get my hand raised at the end. Pretty simple,
Yeah. I mean, it is pretty simple. I believe you're a brown belt in jiu-jitsu out of Henzo Gracie Gym, correct? And
yep.
I'm pulling that out because when I do commentary for 247, we were talking about off air. You're always trying to make sure your facts are right, because the last thing you want to do is pull information from Tapology. Right now, Tapology is not fully accurate about you. There's a lot of times that happens, and there's times I've gone on the air because I think Tapology is right. So you never know. But what is exciting is that you have won. You're a submission guy when you win. You've won by armbar. You won by guillotine choke. You've also won by decision, which is in some ways more impressive because it means you dominated maybe longer of the fight. That was Chael Sonnen's perspective, that to win a decision shouldn't be frowned upon in the UFC, which it kind of is. Like, sometimes Dana White will say, oh, all they do is win decisions. It's like, that's a big deal,
Yeah.
So, but with you, some of your losses have come through strikes. And I know that you are a striker. So you can strike. So what's the mindset here? Just improve your striking, find a way to win regardless of where it goes, or, and this is a compliment, or are you at the point to do the Damian Maia? And that is a compliment. Damian Maia was like, he was good and he was the best. I mean, yes, he never won a belt in the UFC, but how many guys in their early 40s are still fighting for titles? It's because he did his submission, wrestling, grappling, backpack wearing, whatever. What was that made fun of him? That was Woodley. Woodley made fun of him as a backpack. But I think if you can't stop him, it's impressive. So are you at the point to say, which is okay if you are, that BJJ is your way to win and you're just going to crank it up until your opponent gets submitted, or are you still kind of looking for striking opportunities, whatever?
I mean, honestly, for the last few, it's been focused towards like getting my striking better. Like the decision win was, I just wanted to keep it on the feet, and if I could go full rounds and work my striking, that way I could see what I needed to improve on. Still the goal is to improve my striking for sure, but I think I'm at that point now where it's less about trying to just stick to striking and improve that, and then just go for the win by any means. If it comes to the strikes, great. If not, the rest will take it down and choke someone out.
Yep. And obviously that's what's cool about me asking these questions, because I've had you on set over a couple of years now, and I think it's cool to kind of see there's always the mind of the fight, and then there's the fight. So it's cool. It's cool that you have kind of worked on what you're looking for. I was there to watch your fight that you mentioned, the decision win against Anthony Morris. That was a great fight to show that you can strike. And at the same time, wins matter, and figuring out a way to beat an opponent. I mean, your opponent, Chase Thomas, is undefeated. We're probably not going to immediately see a weakness, but one of the cool things about BJJ, and you know this, you're a Renzo Gracie guy, is you create weakness. That's what BJJ has always sought to do, is to attack. No matter how big somebody is, no matter how strong it is, their neck's weak. The carotid's weak. The elbows are weak. You're a brown belt, but that's what's cool. You create a weakness. Now, this isn't telling you something you don't already know, that your opponent is coming off a round 1 TKO win. So obviously you kind of do know what his likely game plan is. So I can't wait to be there live in person to kind of see this, because I know every MMA fight is too simplistic to say striker versus grappler. Every grappler has striking, every striker does have grappling. I mean, we've seen it even at the highest levels, but I do think it's also times where that storyline is likely to be the case, where it really is this gentleman that you're fighting has probably a more mindset to striking. You have a more mindset to submission. So it'll be very exciting. I would think that your rule set allows ground and pound, I would assume. I think West Virginia does.
Yep.
Is that something that, as the grappler, as somebody who, and everybody can grapple, I'm not saying that, but as the more dominant grappler, have you been figuring out ways to use strikes in a more traditional grappling BJJ? And have you thought at all, because it's very exciting, have you thought at all about combat BJJ? I haven't been to a tournament yet. For people that don't know, combat BJJ is a standard BJJ tournament, but with, I believe, slaps to the face.
Yeah, I think you can palm heel too.
Palm? Okay, yeah, because I've seen guys get knocked out, so I think it gets pretty, yeah. But I think even that, now, personally, I think combat BJJ is an element of MMA, because anytime you start mixing, MMA just means mixed martial arts. So anytime you mix one type of karate with Tang Sudo or Taekwondo, then that is mixed martial arts. What we call mixed martial arts is the formula rule set that was agreed upon. But technically, anytime you mix two forms of martial arts, it's now mixed martial arts. So all that to say, have you been watching combat jiu-jitsu? Have you been kind of applying jiu-jitsu, but in a striking environment? And what are your thoughts on that? As a brown belt, future black belt under the Gracie lineage, obviously you're a BJJ purist, so to speak, but what are your thoughts on using BJJ to get to striking on the ground?
Yeah, definitely been working the jiu-jitsu with strikes more, for sure. It does, it's a new element, changes stuff around a little bit, opens up, new sweeps or submissions or passes. And it also opens up some problems for, other more traditional like attacks. But yeah, definitely it changes things, but I've been working on it more. Especially like, top game kind of change, like, jiu-jitsu, generally you want to pass all the, but ground and pound, half guard's fine,
Yep.
So definitely been working it in more, for sure.
Yeah, we've been saying this more and more on the 247 live stream when I'm on a broadcast. It appears, and you tell me because you're the jiu-jitsu guy, but it appears that the reason why when there's strikes allowed, that staying in half guard is sometimes better, or at least preferred, is because you're trapping your opponent's hip. And since you can punch them in the face, keeping their bottom half stationary is more important, because we've seen guys transition to the more dominant position, which it is. But in striking, if you pull your weight back to strike, which happens, you want to control that, but it's natural to pull your weight back. We've seen guys get out because their bottom half isn't controlled, because they're in side control. And even though side control seems like the more dominant position, when strikes are allowed, sometimes it's not. Have you been feeling sort of the hip pressure change difference between pure jiu-jitsu, where yes, you would always want to pass from half guard to side or to mount, or one of those other more dominant positions? Have you been focusing more on pinning? You're not pinning in wrestling, but pinning your opponent stationary. We saw that with Khabib. Khabib could have many times moved to much more dominant positions, but he always did the foot hook. When you think about the Conor McGregor fight, he could have easily gone to mount. My only assumption is that Conor McGregor was probably working cage walks or some type of bump and turn, bump and hip, various mount defenses, which getting mounted by Khabib would probably suck. But was even worse was when Khabib, and is there a term for that, when Khabib stayed like low ankle crossed, like he just kept Conor's legs sandwiched together? What is that?
Yeah, like you're talking about like when he's like that low mount scoop, like the Turk.
Is that what it's called? It's just a low mount, because he's not above the hips, he's like below the knees almost.
Yeah, and he's just turking the legs. Yeah.
Okay, low mount. So and it looks, when you think about it from a pure jiu-jitsu situation, it almost looks like a weird technique. Like, why wouldn't you? But I'm visualizing Conor McGregor sitting up against the cage, and his legs are, cranked up in this low mount, and then the punching starts to land because of the upper body, that you can use the upper body. So, and obviously Khabib, probably the greatest grappler, wrestler, jiu-jitsu, all mixed together fighter, right? So it's just cool. So, do you work a lot with like a ground and pound bag to kind of work your positions and your weight, or are you using human ground and pound bags?
Yeah, generally humans. Yeah.
Humans. Oh yeah.
I mean, it's easy to pin the bag's hips. So
yes. Well, that's true.
Feedback. Yeah.
Yeah. So pinning the hips is obviously big. Controlling the hips. I just have, and I highly doubt this. I've never seen it. I've seen it work in pure jiu-jitsu, but I always taught my guys it in when I was running Pursuit MMA, because I always thought it was cool. But how much do you know, or how applicable is the ghost escape when somebody's on the ground and somebody's got them in side control, but they're on their knees, so they're not like hip tight, they're not down, they're like, on their knees, kind of with just their arms on the chest. It's kind of it's not a lot of weight. And there's something that I always called, I believe it's called the ghost escape, where you kind of fish down under, rip out, and you like roll back on top to a sprawl control. Like
instead of using like the normal underhook, you go like the hip side underhook.
Yeah, the hip side. Yeah. The hip side to turn around. You throw your legs in a pendulum. You pendulum your legs and come down from the hip side, and you kind of pop out. And I think the reason why it's called the ghost escape is because the person is left exactly where they were. They kind of stay in space. So you like ghosted them because you're no longer there. They've stayed and you moved around. I know you're a jiu-jitsu guy, so I wanted to run that past you, because it's something that a lot of my fighters understandably would get caught by good wrestlers and put in bad positions. And I was always teaching them that. And there was plenty of times in MMA where, because of weight distribution, guys stay on their knees. Not a great idea, because there's too much weight on the back end. You got to put your weight on your opponent. But at the amateur level, I would see that all the time. So if anybody wants to look up ghost escape and you're in low level amateur MMA, it's a good escape to learn until your opponents have the weight thing figured out. Then that's not really going to work if they close their hips down. But we were talking about hips. I wanted to throw out the ghost escape, because I always thought in sparring and training and grappling and rolling, it always seemed like it would work if they had their weight back on their hips. So I just wanted to check with the master. Speaking of your brown belt, what's the plan? Is there a plan to kind of pursue your black belt, or right now are you happy being a brown belt to pursue MMA and then down the road? Because I know there's a lot of dedication that goes into it. What are your thoughts on being a brown belt and eventually looking at the black belt? Figured we could talk about that.
I don't really worry about it, or I don't want to say I don't care because that kind of seems like, rude, but I don't, I don't care. I could be a white belt. I'm still going to train, I don't, the belt holds up your pants. It doesn't matter what color it is, uh, really.
Well, you know what the slogan is, and it's true. The most important belt to get is the white belt, because if you don't start with a white belt, you're never going to progress past. And a lot of guys, understandably, like if you don't start, you won't go anywhere. So, and I think there's a humility there that actually works really well, because every once in a while on YouTube, I'll find these undercover black belts, that are kind of famous. They wear it's cool. They wear wigs and stuff. But one thing that I always think that's cool about jiu-jitsu, like pure jiu-jitsu classes, is you can roll with anybody, any skill level, because a really good black belt, brown belt should be able to find a way to stay, keep it relatively competitive. And I've known black belts and brown belts that have come on the show. Maybe they're at the UFC level or something, and they don't have a depth of super experienced BJJ guys around them. So they'll do little games in their brain against a blue belt or white belt, where they'll only use one arm, or they'll only use a certain attack, or they'll only use certain things. So that way the lower belt is getting a lot of good work, but they're not just going for the easy finish all the time. So do you find that like the culture among BJJ is you want to be learning, but you also always want to be giving, let's say, a white belt the opportunity to grow in their skill set?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you're just smacking up on white belts, like they're not learning, but you're not learning either, Like, I mean, you got to give them the chance to learn. And sometimes the best way to do that is to work on new stuff yourself, because if you screw it up and they catch you in a bad position, you can be like, oh yeah, that didn't work. Like, I got to work on that.
Yeah, right. And there are a lot of cool growth things. Like I was watching a Jackson Winklejohn video where he was doing a arm triangle choke from the bottom, from bottom guard, and using it more as a sweep. And now I've seen, but he was basically saying that it's a position where a lot of white belts, and he's right, a lot of white belts kind of grab that position, because they don't know what to do. So they kind of grab it like the sort of the inverted headlock position. And he's like, after seeing a lot of white belts do that, he's like, well, wait a second. It's technically wrong. You're not really going to finish it from there, but it actually builds up to something that you can use for a sweep. It's the same way where like an inexperienced grappler will hold on to the guillotine and then leave themselves open to the Von Preux choke. I like to call it Von Preux because I like to blend blend the Von Flu with Preux, because Oven St. Preux hit four of them.
Yeah.
And so I call it the Von Preux. I'm not cool enough to have it catch on, but I keep saying it that way.
Hey man, I get it, man. Sometimes it's called the OSP choke, man. He's got to build it like a bazillion.
Oh yeah, well that's even better. If somebody wants to call it the OSP choke, and probably it was one of the 4 submissions he had with that choke. I think it was his last one, because people were starting to get aware of it. People were starting to realize, hey, I got to get my arm out of here if he transitions to side control. But I think it was the last guy. He actually takes his arm and puts it around his head, because he really wasn't. And I felt bad for that guy because he wasn't even trying for the guillotine. And the guy did it anyhow. But yeah, and that's something that I think when we're talking about BJJ, that creativity happens when you're comfortable, where you're not always worried about winning every sparring session. Now, that's one of the things BJJ can really develop. I'm sure Oven St. Preux, OSP, came up with that, probably messing around with guys in his gym. Like, oh, I wonder if I just put your arm around my neck. Oh, yeah, it works, because that's not something that's taught. That's something that's kind of found out through rolling around and stuff. So let's talk, since we've talked about rolling around, let's talk about some of your training partners. Let's get to shout outs. Do you have a couple training partners, anybody on this card or anybody fighting out of the gym, whether it's jiu-jitsu tournaments or MMA, that you want to kind of shout out as we get ready to wrap up? I can't wait to see you in action fighting for the new Line championship belt. Go ahead.
Yeah, man. There's a bunch, too many to name. Like, I guess shout out like Corey Hupp-Lazure. He's got a BJJ super fight up in Bethlehem the weekend after my fight. I can't remember the name of the promotion, unfortunately. And we got Andrew Zombie. He's I noticed like on his fight poster, they didn't even put his actual name. They just put his nickname Zombie on there. So I'm going to go with Zombie. He's fighting on the same card as me. It'll be his first MMA fight. Shout out to my buddy Austin McCormick. He was supposed to fight on the 247 fight, but blew out his knee. So he's out of that. But yeah, Mouse, Bobby, Brandon, like obviously my coach Tony, everyone who's helped me out.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, shout out to the other guys from other gyms too who've come by, like Denzel. He's fighting for his first pro fight. Shout out to him as well.
What's the given name of Zombie?
It's Andrew. Oh man, you
Andrew, I got it. Andrew Packard.
Yeah, you have to make me think of his last name, man. I barely remember.
Yeah, obviously they don't use it. Andrew Packard Zombie. I'll reach out to him, see if I can grab him on to talk, because debut fighters, it's always exciting when a debut fighter is coming in for the first fight. So, but you're an experienced amateur MMA fighter. I think this is the third or fourth time you've been on the show. Really appreciate catching up with you, and really happy that New Line Cagefighting, this is Cagefighting 16, New Line Cagefighting 16, the event, May 13th. Buy tickets from obviously Chance or any of the fighters, any of the gyms. Everybody benefits from that. Can't wait to see you in action to go after that belt. I hope to see you with the belt afterwards and do an interview post-fight.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, man. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, brother. Thanks for being willing to talk BJJ shop, because we got a little off track there, but I loved it. Thanks so much, bud.
No problem. Have a good one.
Take care. You got it, bud. All right. Bye-bye.